Hello, everyone. I'm continuing my little adventure learning the Forsyth Concerto, now moving on to the second page. I cheated a little bit. I didn't just start it today. I practiced it a little bit yesterday, and I've looked through the orchestra score and looked through the piano score to see what's going on. I practiced it for a little bit before I did that, and I was puzzled with this second page, and I admit I've looked ahead to the third page as well, that there are very, very few dynamics in the viola part. It's marked piano at the top of the second page, and you've got pianissimo 2 bars before I, piano dolce at I, and then even on the following page, where it gets pretty lively, you would expect there to be some crescendos and fortes and such, but there isn't anything. So I think that it's a little under-edited, as are many concerto solo parts, where the composer expected you to just get to know the music and kind of do your own thing. Although on this second page, it does make sense that you get to play generally more intimate, a little softer than some of the other material in the concerto, because once I looked at the orchestra score, I realized that a lot of this second page is more like chamber music with players in the wind section, just 1 or 2 of them at a time often, with a little exception. I noticed that at the second bar of G, the strings kick in with triplets, and in the third bar of G, when the French horn has the melody against you, they're actually marked mezzo forte. So I'm pretty sure that at the second bar of G, it should not be piano anymore, because you'll just get buried by the triplets. You're playing a counter melody against clarinet and then French horn, and then you get to play with clarinet. And I think when you play with clarinet, about 10 bars after G, the clarinet's actually marked mezzo forte with a crescendo and such. So that section, second bar of G until 4 before I think actually should be somewhere in the range of mezzo forte, just for the proper balance with the orchestra. But it's not the same sort of heavy-hitting forte playing that you might have done on parts of the first page, or in certainly in the third page, where you get all the busy double stops and things. So here we go. This is the top of the second page, and looking at that for fingerings and bowings, I like the bowings that are in the part. I didn't actually change any bowings on this page until 4 before I took extra bows for the 2-bar trills. So I'm doing 1 bar per bow, and then after that I have 1 little tweak of bowings after I, but pretty much doing what's printed for bowings. For fingerings, you could just do that first phrase more or less in first position like this. And that's okay, but it sounds a little bit plain, and maybe we can tweak it with trying it maybe in third position, just starting on first finger. There'll be a little shifting here and there, but I'm not going to get too fancy just yet. So I think that's a little better already. I like this up on the D string near the beginning. I prefer that then. So, but then, looking in the score, when you come in that entrance, you're actually completely unaccompanied. You play those first 2 quarter notes by yourself, and then you're playing with the upper winds after that, and then with bassoon for the second half of the phrase. And at the beginning, since you're unaccompanied, you certainly don't need a bright sound, and you could actually take a little risk and start on the D string maybe, and a little slide down. It's okay, kind of nice. And then I'm actually thinking about maybe sliding back up to a third finger on the C. And that kind of suits the style of the time. If you've ever looked at any of Lionel Tertis's edits in parts that were published in the early 1900s, his fingerings are chock full of slides, ambitious slides and ambitious shifts. And it's kind of overwhelming, the number of slides that are in his edits. So I think my two little slides in that area, I think they're perfectly acceptable given the style of the time. And then I end up in fourth position. I get to shift down to first position, and it's a 2-3 shift, which I kind of like. I don't want to cross for that B flat, so I shift up. And I don't really want to do this, where I finish on the A string and then have to do a double string crossing to get back to the low D. So what I do is I just slide up a little bit to a harmonic. Now that's okay, but it's a little bit plain, and I thought it might be nice to experiment. I'm sliding on my first finger underneath and landing on the 4. And that actually works really nicely in third position of the bar before G, and finishing up in third position is fine. So putting all of that phrase together, so it's a pretty symmetrical phrase, 4 bars, 4 bars, in the counting from the top of the page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the fifth measure, the bassoons come in as you're finishing the first half. The bassoons come in and they have half note, and then they're into the counterpoint that they play with you in the second half of the phrase. So you do want to acknowledge the middle of the phrase with a tiny bit of time. But if you take a lot of time, you're going to mess up the timing of the bassoon line underneath that. So you have to be reasonably civilized. So putting all that together, starting in fifth position at the top of the page. There in the middle of the bar of G, the clarinet comes in, playing basically what you just played, or a version thereof, and you go back to playing the material that was at the bottom of the first page. And I think at this point, this is where you have to come up in dynamic, or you're just going to get buried by the repeated triplets in the strings. So something like this. So I was playing out quite a bit, but not really blasting, because I don't think that fits, even though that the character would kind of suit what I'm playing. If I overdo it, it's going to sound strange against this fairly gentle material that the clarinets and French horns are playing. So they're playing similar material to what you played at the top of the page, and you don't want to play something really brutal against that. So just a little louder and a little more rhythmic to match kind of what you did before, but it still has to fit with what else is going on in the orchestra. Fingering wise, I start in first position. I want to go to third position here. I don't want to use a fourth finger on the high F. Didn't want to do that. So I want to go to third position. I could have used the open A to go to third. And that works absolutely fine. But it forces me to leave my second finger pretty abruptly. Don't have much time to shift. And I felt like I could get a slightly better connection staying in first position until I was done that slur. And then I don't mind a little slide going up 3 to 3. So. I think that sounds kind of nice. So that's how I decided to do it. After that, staying in third position, up to fifth as printed in the part. Here, there's an indication to shift down to a 2 third position. That's fine, but I actually preferred not doing a 2-2 shift from the G sharp to the E. I preferred pulling off the 2 and going to a 1 fourth position. Then I could play the 3 on the G for the longer high note. Always prefer that. And then it's easy to come down as a 2-2 from the F to the E a couple notes later. So I'll play that just that line slowly. This is the third line of the page. And, you know, there's a little small rule that you don't usually do 2 shifts in a row. So I'm breaking that rule here. So I am breaking that, but it's separate. The E is so long that it really doesn't cause any trouble. I think both of those shifts work fine. After that, after those 2 quarter notes rest, you come in and you actually get to play with the clarinet. And I noticed in the score and in the piano part, there's some hairpin dynamics. There's a little crescendo when you come in, which is not in the viola part, but it's in the clarinet part, and also in the piano part, I think. And then a couple bars later, there's a crescendo and a diminuendo. So. Okay, so I certainly feel no reason not to participate in those little swells. They're rather nice. And since the person you're playing with is going to be doing them, you probably want to know about them and do them too. I tweak the fingerings slightly. I go up to a second position just after that entrance. I like the little slide it gives, and I, of course, like playing long high notes on third finger rather than 4. And that moment, you want to draw some attention to yourself, because at that moment, you're not playing with the clarinet anymore. So you actually want to make sure that you enunciate a little bit more. You're less of a chamber music partner, or less of a duo partner, or a parallel partner than a contrapuntal partner, and so you want to bring out that A. So a little slide to it and a little emphasis by landing on a 3 is nice. Back to first position. Here in the part it says Sol Roman numeral 2, which means on the D string, and there's a 2 over top of that note, so that would imply. But then I didn't really like my options for how to come down. So, and I didn't think it was really necessary to go up to a 2. So I changed that myself just to go up to a 3. Then I do a replacement fingering from the B2 to B on 3. Go down to third finger on the G. I could use a 2 there, but I like a slide going up, and I don't like being 4 on a high note like that, so. And straight back down to first position, then up to fourth, using 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me talk about some other things about that phrase before H before I go on. So the swell before H, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before H. There's a crescendo that's in the piano part and in the orchestra parts. And then there's actually a diminuendo 4 before H. And what's interesting is that in the orchestra parts, there's they've at that point been mezzo forte for a while. So you obviously have to be playing a lot more than piano, so you're playing mezzo forte or a reasonably singing forte. 3.5 bars before H, the orchestra is suddenly marked pianissimo. There's a little diminuendo to it in some of the parts. So at that moment, you are kind of on your own for a bit. Then 2 before H in the orchestra part, there's a crescendo, a 2-bar crescendo going into H. And so you're definitely going to want to have to do that crescendo. You're forced to do that crescendo. You get buried. So from 6 before H, 1, 2, 3, 4, no, 5 before H with the quarter note pickup, there's that crescendo, little crescendo that starts. You could experiment actually doing some of that dynamic drop 3.5 before H, something like this. And then we have to do crescendo here. And arrive at something like forte at H. There are some rhythmic challenges in this area, but I'll come back to those in a second. I'm just going to finish the phrase at H, third position. So just before H, when I shift up, I use from the C sharp 2, 1, 2. Then arrive on 3 on the F sharp. Open my whole steps underneath. Down to first position on 2. I just use a quick 1, 1 here. Just an extension. Back to a 2. Okay. So from about 8 bars before H, there's that the rhythmic complications are not too difficult, but there's some practicing techniques you might want to use. Whenever you have real eighth notes in the same passage as triplets, first of all, you have to notice where the triplets are, because sometimes composers don't tell us. You'll notice at the second bar of G, there's a triplet indication on the second beat, and that happens for 4 bars. There's the second beat is triplets, and it's marked as such. Starting in the 6th bar of G, there's no more triplet indications. You just have to know that some of those second beats, things that look like eighth notes, are actually triplets. And again, there are no triplet markings in the phrase before and after H, but you just have to see it, that there are triplet markings at the beginning of the 4th line of the page, second beat, those are triplets, and a few other spots. It's fairly obvious once you know what to look for. When you've got to go back and forth between real eighth notes and triplets, it's obviously you can turn on the metronome, that'll help you a lot, but sometimes feeling the subdivisions and getting that to feel right is a little tricky. So one thing you can do is play separate note subdivisions all the way through, which if I was going to do something like that on, say, the second bar of G, the orchestra is doing triplets underneath you, and you are playing no real eighth notes for about 5 bars. So it's very simple. You would want to play triplets all the way through all the quarter notes, something like this: 3, 4. And at that point, you can't continue playing real triplets because you've got real eighth notes after that, and that would get awfully complicated. So when you get into a passage where there's mixed triplets and eighth notes, you can get creative and do a couple different things. One thing you could do is play all triplet subdivisions except where there are real eighth notes, and then you just have to switch for those particular beats to eighth notes and then back to triplets once those eighth notes are done. So right that bar where I stopped, which is the bar right underneath the bar of G, so the second bar of the 3rd line, I'm going to do that. I'm going to start playing that bar on the high A, triplets, And then I'll switch to eighth notes, hopefully keeping my quarter note pulse the same. As soon as I'm done those eighth notes on the downbeat of the next measure, I'm going to switch back to triplets and just continue to the end of that phrase. So, second bar of the third line. These are triplet subdivisions. 3, 4. So that's something you can do fairly easily. You can also do the reverse of that. You can play eighth note subdivisions all the way through, except in the beats where there are triplets. So doing the kind of the reverse of what I just did. Again, starting the second bar of the third line, playing eighth note subdivisions, except there'll be one beat of triplets in there. My quarter note pulse, hopefully staying about the same. And while you're doing that, you can, of course, you can put on the metronome to make sure your pulse stays nice and even. You can do it without metronome. You can even do it with shaping, and even you can practice doing your rubato if you want to make the phrase a little bit flexible. It's a great way to make your any rubato that you do more organic and feel more natural if you actually can play through all the subdivisions without doing anything really jagged or abrupt in terms of making one subdivision suddenly a lot longer or suddenly a lot faster. So going to the next phrase, this is starting at the end of the third line of the page. I could do that very easily. I could play eighth notes all the way through and switch to triplets when there are triplets, and then back to eighth notes as soon as the triplets are done. So starting at the end of the third line of the page, playing eighth note subdivisions. 1, 2, 3. And just for thoroughness, I'm going to do that all the way through, playing triplets, except where there are real eighth notes. So again, starting at the end of the third line of that page. So triplet subdivisions, except where there are real eighth notes. 1, 2, 3. I'm all confused. I started switching back and forth at the wrong time once I got to H. But you get the idea. With a little practice, you too can get through most of it before you screw up. That's a thing to do. I should explain what I did in a couple spots. If you look before H, 1, 2, 3, 4 bars, 5 bars before H. So there's a dotted quarter note slurred to an eighth note. And I think if I remember correctly, I was trying to do triplet subdivisions except where there were eighth notes. So I actually played the first quarter note of that dotted quarter note. I played 3 triplets, and then on the fourth beat, I switched to eighth notes. So I played like this. Right. So you have to kind of get used to doing it. If you haven't done subdivision practicing before, you should choose a simpler passage to get used to the idea. As far as bowings go, when you're mixing and matching triplets and eighth notes like that, the bowings get kind of weird. You don't really get to consistently be down bow on strong beats. If you're doing an easier passage, say I tried to do eighth note subdivisions at the very top of the page, where I would normally start up bow. If I was doing eighth note subdivisions, I wouldn't start up bow because well, I could, but that's the more difficult version because it puts up bows on all the beats. So if I was trying to make my life easy and just get used to doing this in a simpler way, I would start down bow, and then all of my down bows will be on beats. So. So that's the easier way. If I wanted to kind of push my bow control and my shaping and my listening, then I might consider starting up bow. It's harder, so it shouldn't be the first subdivision work that you try, but it's certainly valuable work to do. It's just that you just have to be a little bit more paying attention to not put accents in weird spaces, weird spots. 1, 2. Okay. So all that kind of practicing, very valuable through a passage like that. And then you can also do that sort of subdivision practicing within the bowing that you're trying to do. This is maybe not the best example of where to do it, but I'll do it anyway. So I'm just going to play, say, after G, and I'm going to do triplet subdivisions within the bowing that I'm actually going to do in the end. So it'll be something like this. That sort of thing. That's slightly more advanced, but it's very valuable. It tells you a lot, not just about the rhythm, but also about your bow division, because it makes it very clear how much bow you get to use on each part of all the longer notes within the longer slurs. Actually, it was a fairly good spot to do that kind of work. I learned a few things as I did it. Moving on now. We're about 4 bars before I. And there you've got, you will have been playing a lot stronger than piano before that. So you'll probably arrive at the beginning of that trill on something like a mezzo forte. And in the orchestra, there's actually a 1-bar diminuendo. So 4 bars before I, there's a 1-bar diminuendo in the orchestra, and then they have pianissimo 2 before I. And you should probably participate in that. You could even kind of round things out, soften things, maybe just a little bit going in to 4 before I. So maybe from 5 before I. Just get a little sweeter as you go over to the A string so it doesn't squawk. Then I take 2 bows on the 2-bar trills. Here I just reach up and let my hand follow. Go to a 2. And I'm trilling. You may just probably notice that the first trill is B to C sharp. That's what the sharp over top of the trill means. It means there's an accidental that applies to the upper note of the trill. Next one, 2 on D, 3 on E natural. That's why there's a natural over top of that. Otherwise it would be an E flat because there's an E flat in the key signature. So it's... And then the second bar of that, you have to switch to E flat for the trill. Okay, and then it's very good to know what's going on in the orchestra or the piano part to time the retard that exists there. And it's interesting to know there's a solo cello little thing going into I. So just look at the piano part, look at the score. On the second beat, there's the solo cello has da 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 da, and they arrive on I. So they actually get to control, well, the conductor and the solo cellist get to control the timing of the end of that trill. So you probably want to fit your little grace note finish. Probably the simplest thing to do would be put the C sharp at the beginning of the 8th note that the cellist has at the end of the bar. So you'll really be playing real 16th notes there as the cellist plays the last 8th note. That would be a simple way to do it. You could try and be fancier if you wanted. Then at I, you don't actually get to set the tempo. The orchestra moves first on the second beat, so they have bom, bom, ba. So they set the tempo. So hopefully your conductor will do something reasonable and rational, or your pianist. So going on from I, in the viola part, there's a harmonic marking to start. Okay, and that means you're actually going to be trilling probably on the A string, and then just reaching up. So. So I decided I didn't want to do that harmonic thing on all the high Ds because it comes 4 times, and I thought that would just be a little repetitive. So, and then doing the same thing 4 bars later. So I decided to mix and match. I start with the harmonic as printed, then very gently over to the A string, and then it says Sul Roman numeral 2. And that means up on the D string. Roman numerals almost always, in string parts, almost always tell you what string to play on. So that's telling you to go up on the D string, so 5th position. And here I'm breaking one of those rules again, where I'm shifting down to 3rd position, and then immediately doing another 3 to get to 2nd position. Experimented with a couple things. There's a couple other options, but I didn't really like any of them, so I'm doing this and kind of hoping it works pretty well. And just to be different, I decided I would start the second half of the phrase on the A string and do the harmonic for the 2nd bar. So how I get there, I'm in 2nd position. Go to 4th position, harmonic, 3rd. Down to 1st position here. And you do really get to play piano dolce there. You don't have to force. The accompaniment is not particularly wild. And the whole section from before G until till after H, there's lots of melodic counterpoint with particularly with the wind instruments. At I, it goes to something a little simpler. Of course, there's some nice little lines within the harmonies and the accompaniment that's going on, but not really an actual melody. So you are really playing a melody by yourself with accompaniment at I. And then the 9th bar of I think it's the 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9th bar of I, you are no longer the tune. On the downbeat where you have that quarter note rest, the oboe takes over the tune that you were doing. And then they do that for 4 bars, and you have some nice counter melody stuff. So they play that tune, and you go. So this, that's not full-blown tune. You are a counter melody to the real tune in the oboe. And the same thing 4 bars later, when you get the octaves again, on that downbeat, that where you hit the open D for the first time, that the flute takes over. And then at J, when you're getting busier and you could maybe just be the main thing going on. Again, you're not. The French horn gets the tune at J. So you're playing an obligato, kind of weaving this counter melody to the 3 different wind instruments that get your melody. In terms of fingerings, in the ninth bar of I do that first thing with an open D and then the fourth finger harmonic on the D string, as printed. And then there's a marking 2 and then a 2 harmonic. Now, you could conceivably imagine that that's here, but that's a weird thing to do, 2 and then cross strings to another 2. So I'm about 95% sure that what was intended was a 2 sliding all the way up to that harmonic on the G string. Up there. I didn't like going quite so high with my second finger, and again, I don't like the control. I prefer the control I can get on a slide when I'm not sliding on the same finger most of the time. So for those two reasons, I just switched it to a 3. I do 2 to 3 up on the G string. And then the next one that you see on G is not this one. It's actually meant to be down here. So that one, so for me, what I did was in the second bar, the second octave, so right here, I wrote a Roman numeral 3 over top of my fingering 3, up on the G string, and then a Roman numeral 2 over the 1 here, D string. Now, in the part it says to do a 4, and I think what is intended is... And then I didn't like my options for how to come down. And I didn't really like hitting that fourth finger. It's a little inconsistent. It's a tiny bit wolfy on my instrument. So the other option was to change it to a 3, as you may have noticed I do occasionally. And that was definitely better. And then if I wanted to, I could come down to a 4. So that's certainly a very good option. I didn't really think it was absolutely necessary to go up on the D string there because I'm counter melody and I don't need to draw that much attention to myself. The oboe still has the tune there. And the oboe is an incredibly bright instrument also. So it's okay if you're on the A string counter melody to that because it won't seem that bright if you're sweet about it. So I just decided I'd just stay in third position. So that was my choice for now. I may go back and change that to a 3. I'm unlikely to change it back to the printed 4, but you never know. You may have noticed that I changed one bowing. The end of that half phrase is... and then there's another up bow marked. So I actually didn't really like having to do that up, and I didn't want to add a slur. That got me too low in the bow to have enough bow for the harmonic, and it sounded a little sing-songy, little too square. So I just added a slur across the bar line. Which is a nice smooth way to finish the phrase, passing it on the downbeat to the flute, who then takes over the melody. And it gives me the benefit I arrive pretty close to the tip, and I've got lots of bow for the first D octave with the harmonic. So something like this. Now, you could do the same thing, but it goes on differently. So I decided I would actually go over to the A string for the second octave. So this is I'm now starting 4 before J. And then you can experiment with color. Because you're going over the A string with a finger instead of harmonic, it's very tempting to do what I just did, which was turn on the vibrato immediately as soon as you get to that first finger D. So I just did. But since it's been a harmonic all these other times, I think it's kind of cool to actually do no vibrato at first and then warm up into what you're going to go on. So. So, and then I use 2 before J, open D and harmonic A, and then I stay in 4th position. Then I just do an extension shift. A replacement fingering here. Back to 3rd position. Another replacement. And at J, the French horn is doing the main tune, and you're doing the counter melody. It's a lovely counter melody. One thing that's interesting to notice that I pulled out of the score is that in the 3rd bar of J, the orchestra has a pianissimo. So that tells me there's an opportunity to do that echo along with them. So it's implying that you would play something like this from the bar before J. Where you just close the dynamic a little bit and change the color on the 3rd bar of J. And we're nearing the end here. Okay, so there's a great orchestral chunk there. That's beautiful. Just before you come in, the flutes are playing along with the violins, and they have a 4/8 note lead in from the beginning of da-dee, ba-da-da-da-dum to your entrance. And so the last 4 bars of that page, actually the flute then continues after that and plays this really beautiful counterpoint to your moving stuff. So when you get to the 2nd bar of your entrance, as soon as you get to the beginning of your long note, they start doing 8th notes. They get to a long note, you start doing 8th notes, etc., etc. It works back and forth. And then the last bar of the page, the flute, first flute, and you get to do that bar of 8th notes together, leading into the next section. So I didn't want to do just 1st position. So that's I don't like the string crossings and the kind of not very smooth. So I didn't want to start on 4. No surprise there. So I chose 3, shifting down to 2nd position. Right back up to 4th position. This time down to 1st position. And there we go. We've arrived at the next page. And I'll get into talking about exactly the character and dynamics of that next thing. You may have noticed I don't play it exactly piano. So just playing that a little more continuous, the last 4 bars to close. See you next time for the 3rd page and maybe the rest of the cadenza.